Hey y'all, here's how to help support this show. First of all, buy my book. It's great. It's called Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Daniel Ellsberg and Ron Paul and Stephen M. Walt like it. Check it out at foolserrand.us. Also, sign up for the feeds, the podcast feeds at scotthorton.org. There's iTunes and Stitcher, and also the full interview archive now, 4,600 and something interviews are all on youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. So sign up, subscribe to that, and then check out scotthorton.org/donate for all the ways to donate there. $50 will get you a signed book. $100 will get you a QR code silver commodity disc. $200 will get you a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think Libertarian audiobooks. A lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audio. And then, of course, you take all different kinds of Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and, of course, Zencoin, which sponsors this show. All that information there is at scotthorton.org/donate, as well as PayPal monthly subscriptions and patreon.com. If you donate at Patreon, then that's a good incentive to get more interviews out of me. I get paid per interview there, and anybody who signs up to donate $1 or more at patreon.com gets 2 free audiobooks. So find out about all that stuff at scotthorton.org/donate. And hey, leave me a good review on iTunes or Stitcher or Amazon.com if you've read the book, and share the shows and that kind of thing. All right, thanks.
Sorry I'm late. I had to stop by the Wax Museum again and give the finger to FDR.
We know Al-Qaeda, Zawahiri, is supporting the opposition in Syria. Are we supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, it's a proud day for America. And by God, we've kicked Vietnam syndrome once and for all. Thank you very, very much.
I say it again, you've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked.
These witnesses are trying to simply deny things that just about everybody else accepts as fact.
He came, he saw, he died.
Well, we ain't killing their army, but we killing them. We be on CNN like, say our name, bitch, say it 3 times.
The meeting of the largest armies in the history of the world. Then there's going to be an invasion.
All right, you guys, on the line, I've got Tim Shorrock. He wrote Spies for Hire about the contracting in the intelligence agencies in the 21st century here. And he writes for The Nation magazine, and he's great on Korea. Welcome to the show. How you doing, Tim?
Thank you.
Well, what a lousy partisan you are. Didn't you get your marching orders? You write for a liberal magazine, therefore you're supposed to find a way to hate Trump and to mock him and ridicule him for being stupid enough to think that he ought to meet with the North Koreans, because only stupid people think that. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, how outrageous of me, right? I said one good thing about Trump. Oh, my God. I thought it was a good idea that he would meet with Kim Jong-un, but no. That's heresy in this world.
Yeah, well, so, okay, let's skip Rachel Maddow and go straight to something that at least comes from, a credible source, somebody who's worthy of some respect, worth the benefit of taking seriously anyway. Robert Kelly, he helped debunk a lot of great lies about it, a lot of horrible lies about Iran in a great way, a former IAEA guy. And he says, well, this is just foolish, and it's giving away the whole store right up front. And, maybe in the hands of some expert negotiator, but not in the hands of Donald Trump. After all, everything's at stake. And if Trump's not willing to actually give up major concessions to get major concessions, then the whole thing's going to fall apart, and it's just going to be a big, stupid mess. And because it is Donald Trump we're talking about. And so what about that?
I've seen Robert Kelly's tweets on this in the last couple of days, and I think he's wrong. For one thing, I think even though this announcement is sudden and took a lot of people by surprise, and there hasn't been any kind of open negotiation between U.S. and North Korea, I think there have been conversations, and there have been back and forth communications, particularly with over these last few months, even while at the height of tensions, there's this group of former U.S. officials, and some connected with the UN, who meet occasionally with the North Korean government, and these sort of they call them track 2 negotiations, and in those negotiations they've North Koreans have made some offers, and the U.S. side has come back and said, well, that probably wouldn't be acceptable, and they've had some preliminary discussions on this, and basically, about 9 months ago, it became clear that North Korea might be, would be willing to take, freeze their nuclear testing and freeze their missile testing in exchange for a freeze of the U.S. South Korean military exercises, and which they see as a major threat to them, and what we got last night, basically it looks like to me that that basic framework of a freeze for a freeze basically is the basis of this agreement, under which Trump is going to go meet with them and meet with Kim Jong-un, and it's a freeze of the North Korea's testing of its nukes and its missiles is going to be frozen, and they've accepted a partial freeze or a downgrading of the U.S. South Korean military exercises, where they're still going to take place, but not with these, not with like nuclear weapons, and not with teams that are set up to assassinate the North Korean leadership, which is what they've used in these past exercises. So, I think that was a pretty major concession from the North Koreans. And so, they've obviously been telling the South Koreans, the Moon Jae-in government, what they would like to see come out of this. And that was conveyed to Trump, So, I think some groundwork has been laid. And I think, what the media here has been missing entirely is the very, very important role that the South Korean president, Moon Jae-in, played in this. I mean, he was instrumental. Without him, this would not have happened. And this has been the core of his, presidency since he became president last May. And, he set out to, he wanted to bring back what he called, the sunshine policy of his liberal predecessors in South Korea, which was to develop relations with reduced tensions through engagement and dialogue and exchanges of economic exchanges, political, sports, etc. And so he made very clear that was his intention from the beginning. And finally, in January 1st, North Korea responded to his overtures and said they would send this high-ranking delegation to the Olympics, which they did, and out of that grew. The negotiations happened during the Olympics, and then after at the end of the Olympics, another high-level delegation came from north to Seoul, and they laid the groundwork for trying to lay the groundwork for a summit between Moon and Kim Jong-un, but Moon Jae-in really wanted North Korea to make some concessions and to agree to talk to the U.S. on phasing out its, eventually ending its nuclear program. So, I think people are missing the fact that some major concessions were made on the North Korean side.
Yeah. All right. Now, so, we can get back to the actual what's at stake in the negotiations and all that, but it sure seems like in right-wing media, the narrative is, of course, support the president on this, but in a way where they're basically saying, see, it's all our threats, and it's Donald Trump talking tough and threatening to kill them all, that finally, he played bad cop to Moon's good cop, and that's what allowed this to happen. And I guess seems like maybe that's somewhat true, right? But then there's a terrible lesson being learned there, that what we need to do always is speak very loudly and carry a very big stick to get what we want.
Well, I think in terms of the military threats and the actions they took, I mean, you got to remember, they were flying these B-1B bombers into Korean airspace and Korean skies last year, and one time they actually flew some B-1Bs up past the northern limit line that goes into North Korea, that goes up the coast of North Korea, which the U.S. had never done, for almost 30 years. And so, the North Koreans have seen these flights and these threats. They've heard these threats from Donald Trump, and that's why they proceeded very rapidly to get their missile capability together and to develop the capacity to shoot a nuclear weapon. So I think that the military pressure actually pushed the North Koreans to develop their systems more. But the other part of the Trump policy, of course, was sanctions, and I think without a doubt, sanctions have started to crimp North Korean economy, and Kim Jong-un has made clear that once he completes what he calls the state nuclear force, he wanted to put some efforts into putting some efforts into economic development in North Korea, and so the sanctions are clearly hurting there. So maybe the sanctions did bring him partly to the negotiating table, but I think really it was the diplomacy of South Korea and the South Korean government treating the North Korean government with respect and listening and hearing them out, and really developing a plan for how to move forward that really made this possible.
Mm-hmm. All right, but now, so what about that argument, though, that really the stakes are too high, that ultimately the Americans have already said you're going to have to give up your missiles and your nukes, and that those are just too tall orders to really imagine? I mean, I guess I should say that at least twice the North Koreans, I think one time outright issued a statement, and the second time it's hearsay by way of the South Koreans, but still credible, that they actually offered that maybe they would even negotiate away their possession of nuclear weapons. But then again, that sounds pretty unbelievable when you look at the incentives, Iraq, Libya, that they have to maintain their nuclear weapons. So what do you think?
Well, for a long time, for years actually, the North Korean position has been they will negotiate with the U.S. on denuclearization and anything else, but on the condition that the U.S. end its hostile policy. And they use this term hostile policy over and over and over again. By hostile policy, they mean U.S. nuclear threats against them. They mean these massive war exercises that South Korea and the United States carry out twice a year. And they mean economic sanctions, which have really been in place since 1953, since the end of the Korean War. So, they want the U.S., they want to normalize relations with the United States. They want to have, normal ties with the U.S. and end the state of enmity. That's what their goal is. And so I think, like by insisting for months now, I mean, for years, actually, the U.S. has said, we'll only really enter into negotiations if they agree first to denuclearize. And that was like saying you first have to surrender and then we'll talk. And that didn't work. And so I think, the long-term goal of Moon Jae-in in South Korea is eventual denuclearization, but there has to be a peace process in place, and relations have to get back to a normal state of relations and out of the state of war before that can happen. So I think if we look at it like okay, long range denuclearization in Korea, but let's set up the steps to build a peace process so there can be an end to, the U.S. hostile policy. And damn well the U.S. hostile policy is very strong. I mean, it's like people talk in very light terms about, destroying and annihilating North Korea. Too bad if it takes a meeting like with Trump to end it, to end that hostility, then that's what it takes. I mean, I think, that's what's going on.
Well, I said from the beginning, not that I like to say that I said from the beginning all the time, but yeah, I did, that this is exactly what he should do. Is he should go from the moment he's inaugurated, he should go straight to Pyongyang and just be like, hey, I'm coming. Air Force One's coming. I mean, it's not like you're going to shoot it down, right? I'm landing at your airport and I'm going to shake hands and we're going to have dinner and we're going to be friends and that's it. that the Cold War's over. We're going to sign a peace treaty, and we're going to drop all our sanctions and all our threats. And yeah, we'd really like it if you would scale back your missiles and nukes, but we're not even demanding that because it's a whole new day. And because he's a right-wing real estate tycoon from Manhattan type character, he could get away with that. And then he could go from Pyongyang straight to Tehran, and he could go from there back to Beijing and then over to Moscow, and he could just say, that's it. We don't, forget dominance and all of this crap. We're just making peace. We don't care. We're dropping all our threats. We're dropping all our sanctions. And so what do you need nukes for?
Right. Well, I think actually, the Korean War ended in an armistice. There's never been a peace treaty, and there has to be a peace treaty. That war needs to be brought to an end. And I think that is a key goal of the North Koreans, and I think South Korea would like that as well. That war was a terrible war. And of course, North Korea remembers it vividly, and it's sort of part of their national character now, remembering what the U.S. did to them during the Korean War. And so, signing a peace treaty would be, a huge thing. And that's, to me, that's the key thing that needs to be done. Mm-hmm. And I hope that's what they get to.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, well, look, the people who are criticizing him, the national security liberals who are criticizing him, are saying that, well, geez, this should only be step 5 because you got to tease all these concessions out. And I mean, how big of a deal are you really going to make? They're saying basically that he's going to get rolled. He's going to end up giving away a lot so that he looks good at his big meeting, when in fact the North Koreans won't have to give up a lot, something like that. And yet it seems like also, it seems like, maybe, I don't know about Trump, but some of his advisors would have thought of that. And that, is it asking too much, Tim, to believe that, yeah, they know that, and that's why they're prepared to make some severe concessions in order to get some, and that they want only a big, grand bargain here and not some little thing. That's why they're sending the president himself. He's going to make an offer these guys can't refuse, and they're going to work it out then. Or is that just, it sounds crazy coming out of my mouth.
Right. I think that, the problem is, we don't, like, for example, like the guy in the White House that's really been pushing a preemptive attack on North Korea, the so-called bloody nose strategy, where they think North Korea wouldn't retaliate, is H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor. And, he's been the Uber hawk within the Trump administration. And he has been, on one side, and then the other side pushing for diplomacy is Secretary of Defense Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson, who've been stressing the, diplomatic strategy. And now it looks like, Mattis is behind trying to get McMaster pushed out. McMaster looks like is going to be leaving soon. The question is who's going to replace him. The other day, Trump had a meeting with John Bolton. If he appoints John Bolton to be the national security advisor, it's all over. Yeah. I mean, Bolton is he's like would be the worst thing that could possibly happen to any kind of peace process in Korea, because he doesn't believe in it. He believes North Korea should be annihilated.
Well, I saw one of the CNN ladies last night saying that McMaster was for this, and that I guess the South Korean. Am I right? I think the way she said it was that the South Korean national security advisor in his statement specifically thanked McMaster for his support on this. And
yeah, he did.
Maybe that was him trying to save his job, was the way that they analyzed it. But
I think they're wrong about that. Those people on CNN, they know nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that part, but I mean, whether he supported it or not is the only real point.
Minutes before the South Koreans walked out there last night at about 7:10 p.m., like Gloria Borger's on CNN snipping away, going like, oh, I've talked to my sources, and it's for sure, Trump's not going to make any trip there anytime soon. And
I saw that.
5 minutes later, they announced that Trump is going there in May. So like, okay, maybe Gloria Borger, you should get some better sources. Yeah. Or just stop.
I think it was the other one. I think it was Bash who cited McMaster, but you're right.
But they said of course McMaster's still there, so that's who they have to meet with. But they went out of their way to thank Trump, I think it's kind of, diplomacy, but they know Trump likes to be, thanked and, applauded and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So I think, the South Korean side, understands the psychology of Trump, and certainly Kim Jong-un does. So he's saying, well, here's this guy who talks about making deals and so on. Let's make a deal. So, I mean, it's possible that's going to happen, but I still think that, I don't think Bolton's going to be named to National Security Advisor, because he would not be in favor of this kind of thing at all. So my feeling is that he's not going to be named, and it's going to be somebody else who's more amenable to diplomacy. And the other question is, who will actually handle the negotiations? The guy who has been negotiating for the U.S., Joseph Yun, who was the ambassador for North Korean issues, is this today's his last day? I guess he quit. He quit in part because he was just so frustrated with the situation. But
he should have stayed on a couple more weeks.
That's right. But apparently there's talk of appointing a special envoy to sort of handle these talks. And that's how it was done during the Clinton administration. When Clinton there was this agreement under Clinton where they did freeze their nuclear program. This is before they even had a bomb. But they froze it for 12 years. They froze the development of plutonium into bombs for 12 years. And Secretary of Defense at the time was Bill Perry. He helped negotiate that 94 deal. But then later, 5 years later, he came out of retirement to negotiate with North Korea over its missiles. And those by almost in 2000, just before Bush was elected, Clinton was very close to an agreement with North Korea on ending their missile program, and basically at that time they were ready to exchange they were ready to trade their weapons program for a normal relation with the United States, and Perry was the guy who was very key on that. I wrote an article about him and the role he played for the nation a couple of months ago. But it's got to be somebody like that who's had experience with them in the past and, knows their negotiating style. One thing about North Korea is their foreign policy infrastructure is, pretty, stays around. And, their foreign minister has been there for, 25, 30 years. And there's a lot of people at the foreign minister level and deputy foreign minister that have been in their positions for a long time and that have had a lot of contact and a lot of communications and even talks with U.S. diplomats and negotiators. So there is, kind of a history of negotiation, and there's even some personal relationships between these negotiators that could be revived. So, I think, if it's a huge if, but I think I think I'm optimistic because I really think that none of this would have happened if Moon Jae-in government, Moon Jae-in himself, hadn't got some assurances from North Korea that they're serious about the offers that they've made, because he's putting a lot on the line.
All right, here's who supports this show: Zencash. It's a great new cryptocurrency, digital currency, if you prefer. I think I do. Zensystem.io to read all about it. It's not just a currency, but it's also a very secure messaging app and document transfer application and this kind of thing. Zensystem.io to find out all about Zencash. And then also read the book The War State by the great Mike Swanson, a great early history of the rise of the military-industrial complex and the new right after World War II. And get Mike Swanson's great investment advice at wallstreetwindow.com. And when you follow his advice, you'll want to get your precious metals from Roberts & Roberts Brokerage Inc. That's RBI.co. You have to have at least 10 or 20% of your savings in metals, of course. And, if you buy with Bitcoin, they charge no premium at all. At Roberts & Roberts Brokerage Inc., RBI.co. Get your anti-government propaganda from libertystickers.com. Brand new website and a lot of great new art coming very soon at libertystickers.com. And hey, listen, it's 2018. You're still stuck with a 2010 model website. For your band, your business, your whatever it is that you're doing out there, you need a new site. Go to expanddesigns.com Shorrock.com/Scott, and you'll save $500. Well, of course, you're not addressing the most important question here, Tim, which is, how can we recruit some Hollywood celebrities to say on TV that they really like what Donald Trump is doing in negotiating here? Because that's
gonna be
the
hard.
kind of reinforcement he really needs right now.
I guess so. Well, the liberals are wringing their hands, and the conservatives don't know what to do. I mean, you watch. I've been like, even as when these negotiations were going on, when the North Korean delegation was in South Korea for the Olympics, the same people were poo-pooing that and saying, oh, nothing's going to come of it. Reporters like Richard Engel from NBC were parachuted into South Korea to show how tenuous the situation is. These people, they're just been so wrong. They've been so wrong on Korea for so long. It's amazing that they're still out there pumping away this disinformation. You listen to these people on CNN and MSNBC talk about the history of U.S.-North Korea diplomacy. It's just like one lie after the other. There's no truth to what they say. They'll say, oh yeah, we signed agreements with North Korea, but they broke it the next day. Not true. Yeah, the U.S. has screwed up agreements by itself, failed to come through, and history is both sides have broken agreements.
Right. Well, in fact, John Schwartz even showed, and this is one of the more outrageous ones on the scale, I think, where the Washington Post quotes the North Korean whichever minister saying that we will never negotiate with the United States, end quote. But then the rest of the sentence was, as long as they keep threatening us. That was the headline.
As long as they keep the hostile policy. No, they do this again. They do this over and over again. Like,
amazing.
That's right. They'll say, yeah, North Korea have put out many statements like that saying, we will not negotiate away our nuclear weapons capability unless the U.S. drops its hostile policy. So the U.S. press always drops that last line about the hostile policy and just says, look, see, they won't negotiate. The absolute, the simpletons that report on Korea it's really kind of sad. It's an enormous disservice to the American people to have such people with such no knowledge whatsoever of history of the role the U.S. has played in Korea. What I find really laughable is that it's often pitched as like the U.S. is some kind of innocent bystander in Korea. We're just somehow the North Koreans just hate us, and we just don't understand why they have this animosity toward us. They don't even look at the history of the Korean War or what's happened since then. The fact that it was the U.S. that first introduced nuclear weapons into the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. had actually nuclear weapons, hundreds and hundreds of tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea until 1991, when George H.W. Bush, pulled them out as kind of as a gesture he made around the world, pulling U.S. tactical nukes out of a lot of countries. But the North Koreans have still faced the threat of American nuclear weapons on the strategic bombers that are in Okinawa and in Guam, as well as the U.S. 7th Fleet, which is in Japan. These aircraft carriers and submarines that carry nuclear weapons. So, they've had nuclear weapons pointed at them for decades, and that's part of what they mean by ending the hostile policy. So,
and now, I think it's worth mentioning here, although almost barely, but that's kind of my point, that North Korea is a totalitarian society, right? I mean, some estimates say that like 2/3 of the population are in the military, this kind of thing. It's a completely militarized garrison state with no freedom whatsoever. But yet the point really is that doesn't have anything to do with anything. That the way Washington, D.C. talks about it, the same way they do with Saddam Hussein, or when they talk about Gaddafi or Iran when it's their turn, they say, look, the measure of how bad these men are to their own people, just like David Koresh, however bad to their own people they are, that's how irrational they are and how unable to speak with them we are. Because as the saying goes, we would legitimize them by talking with them, and yet we would gain nothing because they're so evil that equals they're irrational. Whether it's, for this, that, or the other reason, that's certainly the message when it comes to the Koreans. But so maybe that's true, right? Like you would kind of have to be a psychopath to run a garrison state like North Korea. So maybe these guys are too unstable to deal with. Tim?
I don't think so. I think it's an authoritarian society. There's no doubt about it, totalitarian state. They have this, system of putting people in prison camps that are, run against the political grain. And there is, these camps all over North Korea. I still think as a percentage of the population, the U.S. has more people in prison than in North Korea. But human rights and that whole issue, the U.S. uses it, when it works for it. And for years, the U.S. supported, for decades in South Korea, that was one of the worst surveillance and torture states in the world. Under Syngman Rhee, then Park Chung-hee, then Chun Doo-hwan, finally the South Korean people stood up and kicked out, their military authoritarian governments in the late 1980s, really with no help from the U.S. They did it on their own. But all that time, the U.S. didn't give a rat's ass about the denial of human rights in South Korea. And so, you have to deal with countries as they are. North Korea is the way it is. But, if we believe that there's a threat and if there's a way to mitigate that threat by having negotiations and working out a peace agreement, then by all means, do it. And then I think the changes will be up to the Korean people. I think, you end the state of war, and that's right there is a huge improvement in human rights in general. And I think, it's just sort of like, I compare it to the, to the whole situation with Northern Ireland in the UK, during the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, there was terrible human rights violations in Northern Ireland. The Irish Republican Army was, blowing things up and, killing people and assassinations and vice versa from the British, but it was a state of war, and they negotiated an end to that war, and those kinds of violations, dropped. Once they got peace, the whole situation changed, and I think the situation could change dramatically in the Korean Peninsula if there was a permanent peace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny the way it seems like it should go without saying, right, that whenever the talking head on TV is acting like America has been backed into a corner by a tiny, helpless, little poverty-stricken state like North Korea, that you could tell that there's an agenda behind that, or at least just a loss of touch with the real reality of the situation, where we actually have nothing to lose other than maybe, the ability to extort our friends, the South Koreans and the Japanese, into needing protection from their North Korean enemy.
We have nothing to lose, but who's going to lose is because of North Korea, missile defense has been developed to a huge extent here in the U.S. And so, who's going to lose if you end that threat from North Korea? You're not going to have the need for all this missile defense, and that's what Raytheon doesn't want. Lockheed Martin doesn't want. I think that the keeping North Korea alive as a military threat, is something that also keeps the military-industrial complex alive too. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is going to run against a lot of interests. Here as well. So. Yep.
And in fact, Gareth Porter's recent piece just a few months ago at Truth Out talked about how his two major points is, first of all, I think it's the best retelling that I've ever read of the step-by-step nature of what all the first Bush Jr. administration did to really force the North Koreans out of the deal. They really drop-kicked them right out the door, basically, and forced them to make nuclear weapons as much as they could. And then also on that second most important point, why? And it was because of Dick Cheney and all of his men and their connections to these firms who would rather have a nuclear threat so that they can sell their bogus systems that don't even work to try to shoot the nukes down if the one day ever comes. Because that's just what's in their selfish interests at the expense of the rest of humanity.
Right. I mean, during the end of the Clinton administration, there was this big missile defense, study group that was chaired by Donald Rumsfeld, right? And they came out at the end of that around 1998, I guess it was, with the findings that, the rogue nations, I think that's when the term really became in vogue, rogue nations, North Korea and Iran are developing missile systems that we have to develop our missile defense against. And then, then Clinton came along and almost, signed an agreement ending their missile program. And of course, this was, Rumsfeld was one of the people who was against the Clinton agreements from the very beginning. Rumsfeld and Cheney and good old John Bolton came in, and their mission was to undo these agreements that they called appeasement. So I think a lot of the blame for this, has to fall at the feet of the Bush administration and those neocons. But then, Obama came along and Obama made the situation worse. Obama he said when he was going to run, he would talk to the North Korean leader, but he never did. And they just took up this policy of, they thought that North Korea was just going to somehow collapse of its own weight, and the problem would go away that way. And they were also concentrating on building up U.S. forces in the Pacific, this so-called Pacific pivot, Asia pivot that was under Clinton and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and so Obama really made things worse. And he started a whole program of, cyber warfare against North Korea and trying to disrupt their missile program, through cyber attacks. And of course, that stiffened the North Korean resolve as well. So, I think one of the reasons liberals are so upset is because of the fact that, Obama, this was a huge failure by the Obama administration. And they don't like, Trump coming in and getting any kind of credit for doing something, different, or that might be even lead to a peace that Obama didn't do.
Yeah. But meanwhile, they'll cheer for him when he bombs Assad in Syria and say, yeah, if only Obama had done that more.
Right. I mean, there's this really incredible militaristic streak among liberals. And this, and Korea, of course, is the symbol of Cold War liberalism, Phil Oakes had a great song about it, right? Love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. And when it comes to times like Korea, there's no one more red, white, and blue. This is a symbol of American, containment of communism and the fight against communism. And they don't see really Korea as any kind of independent country. They just see South Korea as just a sort of under the thumb of the U.S. and North Korea as this evil regime that, needs to be destroyed. And they don't see Korea as a complex country. They have no concept of the fact that, millions of people in South Korea have families in North Korea, that they've been cut off from for, years and years and years and decades. And that it's a country that was united for 5,000 years until the U.S. divided it, by looking at a National Geographic map and finding a good line that would make a good division in, 1945. And, this was imposed from the outside. The U.S. and the Soviet Union went along with that. So, I think the fact that the Koreas are doing this by themselves has really shocked a lot of people in Washington. And they're used to the U.S., having its way with the world, and especially with a country like Korea, South Korea. And that's just not happening anymore. And they're like literally losing it because, they just can't, it doesn't fit into their field of vision at all.
Yeah. Thanks very much for your time, Tim. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
All right, you guys, that is Tim Shorrock at The Nation magazine, Spies for Hire. The Secret World of Intelligence Outsourcing is his book, and you can follow him on Twitter at Timothy S. And you know me, I'm scotthorton.org, antiwar.com, libertarianinstitute.org, youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. What did I leave out? I don't know. Twitter.com/Scott Horton Show. Thanks.